Face-to-Face is a series of virtual supports for CPS parents. Our presenters for today, we have Mari Cutson. Mari Cutson is the 2021 Jeff Metcalf Learning Garden intern with Big Green Chicago program team. She is a rising senior at the University of Chicago, where she will graduate in June of 2022 with her BA Environmental Studies. Mari is passionate about promoting urban agriculture and increasing food access in past work experiences, including Pike Place Market in Seattle and the 61st Street Farmers Market at the Experimental Station. In her spare time, she enjoys gardening and experimenting with new recipes to share with her friends. Open Lands Conserving Nature for Life. Danielle Russell is the school garden coordinator at Open Lands and works with school communities to design green schoolyards and activate school gardens. Danielle knows that when children connect to nature and gardening, it will help them with their well-being, and that ensuring access to nature and environmental wellness are issues of race, gender, and class-based justice. Danielle was a program coordinator for DePaul's Community Peacemaker program, organizing college students to facilitate social justice conversation and projects with high school students. Danielle, Pine Tree Keeper, Peace Circle facilitator, and Technology of Participation facilitator. Danielle holds her Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology from DePaul University. Their supporters, Amina Balul and Sam Kaintop. At this time, I would like to turn it over to our first presenter for the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chantel and the CPS face-to-face team. We are really excited to be here today. It's nice to see so many of you who have joined us. Today's session is on encouraging biodiversity in the garden. And I am so excited, all of us here are so excited that Danielle is able to come and join us and share all of her wisdom and experience in helping to plant schoolyards full of wonderful native plants and flowers, and why we do those things, and to help you all be able to bring that all to your homes as well. Danielle, you could keep on moving forward in the presentation. We're all here excited from Big Green, and Open Lands also was a part of the Chicago Grows Food Collective, presenting all of this content for you all. And just to kick us off, to get everybody in the right frame of mind for today's session and introduce yourselves, we really are hoping that we can use this space to help build community, and all of us can come together and kind of support each other as we grow food for ourselves and at school and in our neighborhoods. So please, if you'd like, add your name. If you'd like to share your preferred pronoun in the chat, and any school that you are associated with. And then you can also add, what insect or animal in the garden do you love? Is there an insect or animal you're curious about? Or is there an insect or animal that you have a very hard, difficult relationship with or are afraid of? Just to get that going. I can start just to get things off. My name is Sam Kaintop. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm associated with many schools, but my daughters are just finishing a school year in American Magnet School, so I will claim a relationship with that school. And then I really love birds this year. I have seen so many new birds that I haven't seen before, and so I'm really excited to learn their names. I don't know bird names like I would like to, so birds are something I'd like to get to be more familiar with. I'm both curious and I'm loving. Things I hate or afraid of. I've really gotten over a lot of my fears of insects and spiders and things like that in the garden, but I really have a love-hate relationship with yellow jackets or paper wasps, because in the summer they're friends of mine and help to eat caterpillars, but in the September, I get stung almost every year. So I'm not a big fan of paper wasps in September. Go ahead and add any of your own insect fun facts into the chat so we can all get a little sense of where we're at. Robert, I see you love the black crows. I love that. Yeah, Danielle, those centipedes inside could be creepy. I'm loving those worms too. Kelly, that's great to see. Butterflies are spectacular. No sé qué son caracoles. Sí, me encanta mariposas también.
Sam,
Sí,
son los que
sí.
tienen una conchita y se les sale una antenita, se esconden en su concha. No sé, esos son los caracoles.
Yo sé, snails. Gracias, Catherine. Snails. Sí.
Esos.
Hola, Jovita. Thanks. This is great to see all of these elements of nature that we all like, that we're curious about, some of us that we don't like so much. All of that is wonderful. We can keep continuing this conversation in the chat, and let's move on into the presentation. Again, just an overview, we will be back next week on July 6th to talk about watering and all the different ways we water in the garden. And then this garden workshop will continue every other week after next Tuesday through August 31st. Again, thanks to CPS Face-to-Face for hosting us. Thanks to Open Lands and our Chicago Growth Food partners for joining us. And we are all excited to have you join us. And now I will pass it over to Danielle, who will get us going for learning about all the different biodiversity we can help support in the garden.
Thanks, Sam. It's so good to be here with y'all to talk about biodiversity in the garden and why biodiversity is important. Again, my name is Danielle Russell and I work for Open Lands. And Open Lands is all about connecting people to nature where they are. So sometimes when we think about nature, we think about some far off place like a forest preserve or even somewhere farther. But we really want to connect to the nature that's right on our block or right in our backyard, whether it's a really beautiful tree, a garden, or even just like a small pot with just a little some growing it. It's even connecting to something small is really important to get those benefits of the mental wellness and just connecting to something that's larger than us. So thanks for being here and thanks for having me here. And I also want to share that this is information that I too am learning a lot about. So if there's anything that I'm mentioning, I would love that people could also share things that they know, because when we have so much collective knowledge and I only have like one little piece, you know? So I would love for you to bring your pieces as well. All right, so first I want to start by asking, what is biodiversity? So if people wouldn't mind kind of sharing in the chat, like what are things that come to your mind when you hear this word biodiversity? Just to kind of start getting the conversation going. Diverse life forms, many different kinds of plants, animals, not sure, that's all right. The number of species in a given area, ecosystem boost. Yes. I love how this is coming together. All kinds of plants and critters in a space supporting each other and eating each other, yes. The variety of life in the world or in a particular habitat or ecosystem. Thanks y'all for bringing this together, and feel free to continue adding, but just want to kind of get going here. So yes, definitely what people have mentioned is what biodiversity is. It's the idea of having a variety of different types of life at all levels. So there's biodiversity in soil. There's all types of bacteria that can happen in there. Or like in this garden, in this picture, there's a lot of different types of plants, whether they're flowering or not flowering, having trees. It's this idea of what people mentioned, having an ecosystem. So when you have a lot of different types of plants or a lot of different types of animals in one space, that helps to understand how healthy is this ecosystem. So sometimes when we think about the nature, it's something that we feel kind of removed from, but we're a part of the ecosystem too. So as people who are tending our gardens, we have this opportunity to really support these ecosystems. So I'm going to share some stuff, and I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed. So if you take anything away, as much as you can kind of mimic nature in your garden, the better. The more resilient your garden is going to be, and the more you're going to be able to help different types of wildlife out in the outside. So why is biodiversity beneficial to the garden? So as mentioned before, it helps to make ecosystems healthier. So if you think about, if you just are planting one type of crop, that makes those plants are a little more susceptible to things like disease and drought and all types of issues that can happen. So one example that comes to my mind is before the Civil War ended, with cotton being grown in the South, it was really degrading soil. And so George Washington Carver, who we know as like the peanut guy, he was going around and he was asking people, he was teaching people that if you plant more than just one thing, it helps to kind of make your soil not degraded. It helps to add fertility to the soil. So he was having people plant things like peas and peanuts and these different things that add different nitrogen and different things to the soil, and also rotating your crops, because if you're just planting that one thing, it's just going to leach out a bunch of different nutrients from the soil. And as you probably may know, healthier soil makes for healthier plants. Another thing that's really important for biodiversity is that you're providing, as mentioned before, different habitats for different beneficial insects. So if you're just having those monocultures, monocrops, just one thing, and those plants are more susceptible to things like pests, if you're able to have a diversity of different types of plants that are bringing beneficial insects, like Sam was mentioning, those wasps that might feed on different pests in your garden, then you're in better shape and you have to do less damage control and less pest management. So one of our favorite bugs in the garden are pollinators. And a pollinator is anything like a bug or any person who can bring pollen from one flower to another. So that just kind of looks like them, getting a little snack. They might be trying to get that nectar and they just so happen to be picking up some pollen with them. Although bees, they're pretty cool because they're like, you know what? I like the nectar, but I also like the pollen too. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get my pollen in my little knapsack and then I'm gonna bring it back to my babies, and then they're able to feed on all that protein or whatever. So that's why one of the reasons why bees are kind of considered like one of the #1 pollinators. So a lot of times when you think about pollinators, you think about bees. And we just love pollinators because without them, we don't have fruit. So sometimes when I'm in the garden with students and there's a bee and we're all kind of freaking out, well, they're freaking out. I'm freaking out on the inside, but I'm trying not to, trying not to also freak out. There's an opportunity for that conversation of, hey, do you like, what's your favorite kind of fruit? Strawberries, raspberries, blueberries. And then being able to have the conversation with them about, well, if it wasn't for bees, most likely, we wouldn't have those kinds of fruits. So just, a little fruit for thought. So one of the ways to encourage pollinators is definitely planting a lot of flowers, because that's what they love, that's what they feed on. Something to keep in mind is having different types of flowers, like just biodiversity in general, biodiversity of flowers as well. So you can see here, this flower, it's kind of, it's a little flat, it's a little small, but it has a nice little landing pad for that little bug there. That's something to keep in mind as well. But you also might want to have some trumpet flowers or different shapes, because they'll attract different pollinators. So hummingbirds, they really like those trumpet flowers, or something that they can go into, where a bee likes something they can stand on. Butterflies also like to have something that they can put their little straw nose tongue thing into. So, it just depends on what you're trying to attract. Another thing to keep in mind is different pollinators like different colors. So bees, they see purples and blues and violets really well. That's like their favorite flower. So if you can even plant things like, I don't know, hyssop or like different mints, things that have like that purplish blue color, and then they have little stalks of the flower on them. They love those because they'll just stay right there, They really also like having like one type of plant that they can keep going to, because oftentimes when they're out getting their nectar and their pollen, they'll just stick with the same flower. So that's something else to keep in mind. We also really love to promote native plants, because with these plants that are native to the area that we're at, the pollinators and the other insects and animals have evolved with these plants over thousands of years. So they have a certain type of relationship that they just do well together because they know each other. So if you want to attract native pollinators, you want to plant native plants. And I also want to mention having flowers that are flowering in every season is also really helpful, because once the pollinators are starting to wake up early spring, they gonna need something to munch on, which also brings me to, I'll talk a little bit about it later, but some of these plants that we consider to be weeds or invasive can actually be really beneficial for those early pollinators. So like dandelions, violet, those things that we can consider to be weeds are really important for an early food source for pollinators. So it's a little something to think about. Another thing we also want to promote is planting trees and shrubs, because pollinators like to have places that they can nest in and be safe in and shelter. So you got your food source with the flowers, but you also want to keep in mind the different shelter and habitat that they just are chilling out in. Especially if you're trying to like raise monarchs, it's great to have that milkweed patch, but they also like to have something like woody that they can, I can't even think of the word, go into their cocoon in. So if whoever knows that word, please drop it in the chat. And they also roost in trees. So a lot of times, especially towards when they're about to start migrating, you'll see maybe 20 of them in the tree sometimes, because they're just, getting ready to bounce, or they're hiding from the rain. But yeah, they need trees. And then here, I think I might be able to share this out later, but let's see, I'll just visit this page really quick. There's just a lot of different things that you can do to promote pollinators, and to keep in mind once your plants are flowering after fall, something that you can do is to just kind of leave the dead flower stalks and because bees will kind of burrow into there and hibernate or lay their eggs and whatnot over the winter time. And that's not just bees, that's for a lot of other different pollinators as well. So keep that in mind. And it's kind of going back to this theme of the more that you can kind of recreate nature, the better off and more biodiverse your garden can be. So definitely want to talk about host plants, talking about that symbiotic relationship of the ecosystem. So some plants, they just lay their eggs on like 1 or 2 plants, which is kind of picky, but also it's just what they do. So if we want to have these really beautiful butterflies, then we can provide these plants because that's what they lay their eggs on, and that's what is going to keep them coming back. So I just have a few here, but there's so many different host plants and so many different charts out here. But I think this is a good start, especially if you have a edible garden, incorporating that dill and that parsley for this beautiful black swallowtail butterfly. And keep in mind, they will really enjoy what you have provided, So if you really also want to enjoy your dill and parsley, you might want to plant a little extra. But it's if you want to kind of make an offering to nature, then go for it. And then again, violet is coming back here. One of those spring early plants that we can consider a weed is actually a host plant for this really beautiful butterfly. It's also really good for like immune health and a lot of other things too, but that's a whole nother conversation. So yeah, I love monarchs. I'm sure a lot of y'all like monarchs. So I just have some resources here. MWRD, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, they are giving away free milkweed seeds to folks if you want to just take a pledge that says that you want to support monarchs. And another thing that you can do at your home or school is to develop what they call a monarch way station. And it's just a place that monarchs are, it's like a little monarch habitat, but you can get this nice sign, which is very educational for people that are passing by. And it's just nice. I don't know, it's always good to let people know what's going on. And especially because sometimes people might hear like, oh, milkweed, that's a weed, right? But to be able to share with people and educate them about the important biodiversity work that you're doing. So again, just want to mention thinking twice about how you're handling plants that are considered weeds, because some of them, I mean, dandelion greens are really nutritious, dandelion root is really nutritious, and the flower provides pollen for pollinators. So it's just like, I think it's a really cool plant, but it might take over your garden. You just might not want it. But trying to resist using herbicides and things like that, because even if you're just putting it in one spot, it'll leach out and it could affect the other plants that you're growing. And it can also affect the waterways, which affects, we're all part of the ecosystem. So just keeping in mind, trying to see if there's other ways to handle the plants that are considered weeds or invasive in your garden. And also want to share to think twice about how you're handling pests, because if you're using different chemicals on something like this hornworm, that might impact your nesting or your incubating. I can't think of the word, but I think someone might have put it in the chat. The larva of the different caterpillars or whatever that you do want in the garden. I don't know if Sam or Amina have any tips on that.
I was just going to say, getting used to observing the different caterpillars, especially that are in your garden, and getting to know them. Because, we were talking about the black swallowtail butterfly and its caterpillar that you'll see on your dill. And so knowing that that caterpillar, it will be present on dill and fennel and carrots and parsley, all of those plants that are in that same family, getting to know them and say, oh, this is a really beautiful butterfly. I'm okay with that eating some of my leaves. And also that's not a caterpillar that will eat the entire plant. They're just going to nibble on it and they'll eat some leaves, but not the whole plant. But then there's something like this, where like a tomato hornworm that's pictured here that you'll find on your tomato plants or your potato plants, sometimes a pepper or something like that. And one of these caterpillars can take down an entire plant in a matter of a couple of days. And so, maybe this is a caterpillar that you want to pluck off with your fingers and toss to the birds. Support some of those birds by tossing it into the alley and not spraying it, but be aggressive with it. And thinking about, there are sprays that you can get that will kill caterpillars, but we also don't want to kill every caterpillar. And so being really mindful and cautious, and don't escalate to those most severe, most dangerous ways of managing pests before you've really worked hard to understand what is the damage really being caused. Is this something I can manage myself by just pulling things off with my fingers? Can I pay my kids 25 cents a caterpillar to collect them, right? Like, are there strategies that you can use to help manage some of the things in your garden that you're not willing to let be eaten, and do that in a way that's as least harmful as possible to the rest of the life in the garden? One of the things that Big Green, I'll just put a link to in the chat, does is we recommend a spray that we make with garlic and chilies, where you put like a whole head of garlic, you crush it up and put it into a big milk jug. You add a handful of hot chilies, dried hot chilies, fresh hot chilies, just really hot peppers. You fill it with water and you let it steep for about a day. You can let it steep for up to a week. I just put it out in the sun and I filter it into a spray bottle and I put it on my plants. And that seems to be a really effective way of deterring things on plants that I really want to protect, that I know might be being damaged, but it doesn't harm. It's not going to be killing any of the insects that are in your garden. So things like aphids, things that you see a lot of pressure on from bugs, you can use that spray to help support them. Also things like squirrels and rabbits tend to stay away from that as well, which is really nice that you can not be damaging the environment, but still be protecting the plants that you really want to be eating for yourself. Thanks, Danielle.
No, thank you. That was really, really great information. I'm excited to see that spray recipe at some point. Cool. So, there we go. Yeah, so we also wanted to just talk about like the impact of urban biodiversity. So even though we might not be creating like large prairie landscapes, any little thing that we can do is really helpful for creating habitat and for kind of just being a part of the ecosystem around us. And also see if Sam or Amina wanted to add anything.
I think you covered it, Danielle, from my perspective. Yeah, these are actually two shots from my backyard. And what I love about thinking about urban spaces is, even though we have a tiny patio or a little bit of a yard or just a little bit of space, that we're not about to reforest Chicago, right? We're not about to, push back the desert if we're living in an arid climate, but we can do the little things that we have control over in our own spaces. And when we think about how many people are living in our city, the more people that we bring into this conversation, the more little changes we make in our own spaces and encourage our neighbors to do the same. Start doing away with lawns, because that's a monoculture, right? Grass after grass after grass yard. That's just a monoculture of grass that's not supporting a diversity of life. But thinking about, where the dandelions can be in that lawn, where the violets can be in that lawn, and we're okay with it because it's beautiful flowers and it's supporting bringing butterflies. Where can we put a little? This is a picture of some lavender that a swallowtail is eating some nectar from. Where can we put a little container of lavender somewhere in our yard and have those purple flowers that are attracting the insects? What are those little things that we can do that together with our neighbors actually will add up to a huge amount? And we're actually learning, there's some really cool research that's showing that urban spaces, because of all of the diversity amongst all of our yards and patios and windowsills, are creating a more biodiverse region than in many rural areas, because of the monocropping that's happening in a lot of our agricultural fields is removing habitat. And so because we're building it in our yards in different ways and our windows in different ways in the city, we're actually building a lot of refuge for animals and insects that aren't as abundant in rural spaces. And so we all have our opportunities to play our part in supporting increased biodiversity in our world.
Right on.
I love that. Just to add, so whenever I'm talking to my teachers regarding what we're going to be planting in our learning gardens, it's always the idea of approaching it like it's its own small mini ecosystem. So essentially, doing preventative measures like Danielle had mentioned earlier, when you're thinking of crop rotation and interplanting, and just kind of having a variety of different crops within one garden bed or even a planter, that can really serve as preventative in kind of controlling pests, and ensuring that your entire crop is not decimated by by little critters that you don't want in there.
Thank y'all so much for adding. Really appreciate y'all's expertise. And also wanted to talk a little bit about trees. So just in general, trees improve, air quality, and they capture stormwater and help with flooding, which is something that's really important right now. They reduce the urban heat island effect by the shade and just general greenness and helping to mitigate climate change and all of that. But I also wanted to mention in terms of biodiversity that oak trees are known to support at least, I can't even see this right here, but a lot of different species. Like I know it's over like 2,000 because of just the way that they're shaped. They support a lot of different types of animals, a lot of different types of insects, and their impact that they have on soil and soil health also helps to support the different types of plants that can grow around it, the different soil life, and they're just really great. So something definitely to look into is oak ecosystems, and that's why we're trying to plant a lot more oak trees now, because of they're just like super beneficial. And obviously being around, well, maybe not obviously, but y'all probably know, being around trees and green space is just really good for us because we're getting that fresh air, and being able to observe nature has been shown to help people heal, like if they're in the hospital or if you're going through something, if you're feeling blue, being able to be outside and be able to see that beauty is just really helpful, especially I think a lot of us really got that during the pandemic. And also it's just great for building community. So even if you're not able to plant trees in your yard, being able to go outside maybe with your kids and be able to have them like adopt a tree, find out what kind of tree it is, what does it need, what kind of things eat its fruit, what does its flowers look like, is it edible? Because there's a lot of edible trees in Chicago that are just out here. Just kind of getting them to think about how they can care for the trees around them. And with Open Lands, if you're interested, we have a tree keepers class for people that are interested in learning about how to take care of trees in their neighborhoods. And we also have a grant if you want to plant trees. So you can plant, I think it's 10 to 40 trees in your neighborhood with your neighbors, get everybody outside and planting trees. So check that out as well. Oh, and then we have this here. Cool. And I'll pass it along to Big Green to talk about edible flowers.
Great. Thank you so much, Danielle. So Danielle just gave us a really great introduction as to why planting flowers in the garden can help support biodiversity and pollinators. And so another co-benefit of planting flowers is you can also eat them. So on this slide, we have a chart of a lot of the different flowers that you might encounter. Some of the more common ones you might encounter around Chicago are borage, cornflower, marigold, chamomile, lavender, and violets. And again, Danielle mentioned that violets you may think they're a weed, but you can also eat them in addition to them supporting pollinators. So all of these flowers have their own unique taste, and there's tons of different uses for them. One simple use is just to use them as a garnish or top a salad with something like borage, which has a nice cucumber taste, or cornflower or marigold. Another use, you could brew a tea with dried chamomile, which is a nice bedtime tea. It's known to be relaxing. Violets you can use to decorate baking. So if you're making a cake, you could decorate it with violets, and that would make a really beautiful cake. Lavender would be good to add to beverages. So you could make a syrup out of it or add it to lemonade, whatever you're drinking. So those are just a few examples of like some of the ways you can use flowers in the kitchen. And they're a great way to get another benefit out of planting flowers in your garden besides encouraging those pollinators. And now we want to pause screen sharing for a second and have a invitation for everyone here today. And so we like to wrap up these workshops with recipe sharing. And so last week, Amina shared with us about how to preserve herbs using freezing them, refrigerating them, infusing them into oils. And this week, I'm going to share a recipe about a grain salad, which is a great way to use up different elements of the garden. But next week, we're hoping to feature a recipe from the community. And so if anybody has a recipe that they'd like to be featured, it can be any different course, any different culinary tradition or complexity level, whatever. We'd love to have you share that. And if you also need some time to think about it too. Yeah. Oh, and I see, yeah, if you need some time to think about it too, can email us later or pop it in the chat. Yeah, feel free if anyone wants to, if this has made anyone think of a recipe, feel free to unmute yourself. Oh, and I see there's a question too in the chat about where to purchase some of the edible flowers. I think I've seen them at farmers markets. I think purchasing them can be a little bit more difficult because they don't keep super well. I'm not sure if Sam or Amina or Danielle had any source of purchasing flowers.
I was just about to put in the chat. I rarely see edible flowers available for purchase, and when I do, they're very, very expensive. Yeah, because their shelf life is so short, and they're very labor intensive to harvest and package and get to the market. So some urban farmers grow edible flowers because they can get such high value for them by selling them to restaurants who use them in very expensive dishes as like a garnish and things like that. But that's another thing about the beauty of leaving some of your weeds in the garden and getting to know some of your flowers is when you're growing a more diverse garden of flowers, you have them available to you to pick and harvest. And if we showed a picture in the slide earlier of a dandelion growing in a container. If you know that soil in that container is safe to grow and you can eat those dandelion flowers or make tea from them. If you know the violets growing in your container in the spring before you plant something else, if they're flowering, you can pick those little purple flowers, leave one or two for the bees and the butterflies, but harvest some of those for yourself and toss them into a recipe you're making and feel fancy. It's really great. That's kind of thinking about some of the benefits of growing a garden that just aren't really available to you if you're trying to purchase things.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I also saw in the chat that somebody made, or a cafe made some gummies with lavender, so that sounds really cool. Yeah, lavender is really popular as an essential oil for like relaxing. So I think adding it to gummies is a really great idea. Yeah, and if anybody else has anything they've made with flowers or with any other thing they've grown in the garden, or yeah, we'd love to hear any and all recipes. And we'd love for this to be a space where people feel comfortable sharing recipes with the rest of the community. Yeah, so I can also share my recipe now. So if we could go back to the presentation. Thank you, Tanya. Okay, so today I thought it'd be a good idea, keeping with the theme of biodiversity, to share a recipe for a grain salad. because a grain salad is a great way to use up whatever you have on hand. And so if you're cultivating biodiversity in your garden, you can use just what's in season. And it could also be a use for edible flowers if you want to top your salad with edible flowers. And so a grain salad is a really flexible recipe. So generally the components would include some kind of grain. So you could use quinoa, farro, rice, bulgur, spelt, rye berries, barley, really whatever you have access to. And it's a great way to also use leftover grain. So if you cooked too much rice one night and you're trying to figure out what to make for lunch the next day, you could turn it into a salad. And then the next component would be some kind of veggies. So this is where you can really use what's in season, use what's in the garden, or just clean out your fridge too. It can be good to use sturdy vegetables if you plan on making a lot of this recipe and keeping it in the fridge. But you can also use any kinds of greens. Peas work well, peppers, edamame, really anything you can think of. You can add it in. Protein, so to make, if you want to have this as more of a complete meal, you could add some cheese, some nuts or seeds, some kind of animal protein like maybe chicken, tofu, or you can add hard-boiled eggs, really whatever you want to make this really nice and filling. And then the toppings, so this is where the bulk of the flavor will come in. So you can, a dressing would usually include some kinds of oil and some kinds of acid or vinegar, so like a citrus fruit or like balsamic vinegar, and you can, apple cider vinegar is a good one. So whatever flavors you like, and this is a fun way to kind of switch up the dish. And you can add some seasoning and some kinds of garnishes, including edible flowers. And so I'll just walk through what I did here as an example. I'll just wait 1 second.
Sorry, I've followed somebody's. I was so interested. But sorry about that.
No worries at all.
I think that was it on the presentation.
Oh, wait, could you go back? Danielle, could you go back to the slide real quick?
This one?
Yeah, the one that was just up there, yeah. Yeah, so I'll just, as an example, walk through what I did. So I used beets, wild rice, hazelnuts, and goat cheese. And so all you have to do is just prepare your grains according to the package instructions. So just usually just cooking, boil in water, and using the amount of the ratio given on the package. And then your veggies, prepping them, it really just depends on what you have. I use beets, and I also use the beet greens. And so I roasted my beets and washed my beet greens. And then I also I whipped the goat cheese with some basil I had in my garden, which is really good. But yeah, that was just to give it a bit of protein. And then I made a dressing with olive oil and lemon. And so after you've prepared all your ingredients, you just need to assemble them, add your toppings, and enjoy. And if you want to keep this for a longer amount of time, I would recommend not adding like the toppings or like nuts or the dressing until right before you eat. So the salad stays fresh as long as possible. And yeah, that's the recipe. So thank you all for contributing and sharing your recipes too. Really nice to hear.
Thanks so much, Mari. That's great. It's making me hungry. It's almost dinner time. And then I just wanted to say thanks to all of you who are so actively participating in the chat, and kind of just echo Mari's encouragement that she shared earlier today. If you are excited about a recipe, or you're growing something in the garden and you want to prepare it, or you're looking for tips on a specific vegetable, if you've got just anything that you'd like to contribute to this section of the conversation, please go ahead. You can direct message me your contact information in the chat. You feel free to just add it to the chat and we can follow up. I'm also going to add here our email Chicago program at biggreen.org is a way that you can reach out to us and kind of share any feedback you have, as well as the feedback form that's through CPS Space, to help us kind of better respond to and work with all of your interests. And kind of with that, I don't know if anybody has been inspired, or anybody makes a grain salad that they'd like to share anything that Mari's inspired with this great wild rice, Native American wild rice recipe. All right, well, we don't want to keep everybody too long on this beautiful afternoon. And just quick say thank you so much to everybody who has joined us. It has really been wonderful. Danielle, a million thank yous to you. Shout out for all of that great information on different plants we can put in our gardens to attract specific crops, specific insects and pollinators that we want to be growing in our gardens. Really wonderful. I'm so encouraged to continue to plant and grow so many different kinds of plants in the garden to attract and get to know the names of all the different insects that I'm attracting in the garden with them. For those of you who attended last week and are looking for a little bit of kind of the links or the follow-up, or would like to revisit any of that content, I'm adding a link right now to the chat as well. This is a blog post where we have added all of the links that Dr. Akila Martin had recommended and shared with us, and her garden asset planner that you can use to help plan your garden space, as well as the ideas that Amina shared to help use and preserve all of our herbs. I'm getting a prompt from an iPhone participant that they love cucumbers. I've got a good cucumber recipe I can squeeze in one of the upcoming sessions. Great idea. And yeah, thank you all so much for participating. We will be following up and sharing again in our next session the links to the future blog posts. We'll have this presentation available and be linking all the recordings that CPS Space is going to be adding to their YouTube channel. Again, thank you all so much. And we have just a couple minutes left, and we can hang out for anybody who'd like to come off mute and share, add anything.
Yes, Sam, this is Chantel. I did see a question. I don't know if you all answered it. From the iPhone, it asks, what is a good hood plant to start a garden with?
Sorry, a good what plant?
Hood plant.
I think they meant good plant. But
Got
any
it.
plant, you can grow any plant in the hood.
Look, thank you.
Yeah,
Gotta make the soil.
Yeah, well, a good plant to start a garden with to me is any plant that you are interested in, right? If it's a beautiful plant, you wanna grow it because you think it's beautiful, that's a good plant to start a garden with. If it's a plant, I saw somebody who loves cucumbers. If I love cucumbers, I would start my garden with cucumbers, and it's not too late to plant them. You know, to me, start with what's easy and what you love and what you're going to want to love to spend time with, time learning about, time watering, time caring for, time harvesting, time talking about with all your friends. Because, you know, when you start gardening, then you start to be the weird person at the party who's like, you know, talking about plants. You know, so that's where you should start, with the things that you love. And then as you go from there, then you can start to experiment with things and try different things out. That's a great question. Yeah, we are the coolest people.
All Are there any more questions at this time? If not, it is something I would like to say before the session ends. I just want to make sure I'm not leaving anyone out.
Yeah,
I have
I
a
actually have.
question. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Was that Amina?
No, go for it. It's all yours.
Okay. I was just going to ask about the I don't know if you saw I put it in the chat about the cassava leaves. I learned about those this spring. And I had some stew, cassava leaf stew. And I was like, oh my God, what is this? This is good. So I was wondering if maybe next time if someone has any recipes or anything, you know, like what you can use the cassava leaves for. That stew she made with rice and chicken was really good. But like I haven't heard of people eating it like a salad, you know, or something like that. And so if you have any ideas, please let me know. Thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Bridget. Anyone else?
Mhm.
Amina?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask Danielle a question in terms of a timeline for creating a pollinator garden. So I know a lot of folks that are excited about getting that going and just ensuring that those plants are ready for when pollinators are out. When should folks start on that?
That's such a good question. I think that what's coming to my mind is that that's a year-round thing. So if you want to plant native plants, the best time to do that is in the fall, so that they can have it's just easier for them to, they'll just like go to sleep and then they'll wake up all refreshed, you know? And it's the same for planting seeds because they like that cold stratification. Like they just need that cold to like be like, okay, I'm a plant that's native here. I know what I'm doing. Let me come back in the spring. And then in the springtime, you can, and through the growing season, you can always plant flowers. So I would say all the time. Even in the winter, if you're just like, man, I don't have anything to do, but I want to get outside, but I want to do the most, you can always scatter some native seeds in the winter time as well. Or other plants. I had some chamomile that just seeded itself over the winter time, and I didn't ask it to, but it came back in the spring.
Thank you.
One thing I would add is just in the summer, in like the heat of summer, now that we're getting into July and August, to just be careful when you're putting new plants and new seeds in the ground, because that heat, especially a lot of dry heat, if this rain ever stops, it can really stress out new plants, especially when you're transplanting them. So if you do just like you can't wait to fall and you got to get started now, just make sure you're helping those plants out. Give them a little shade, you know, or make sure you're giving them extra water every day just to help get them through that really hard, hot period in the summer. Danielle's right. Plants that are native to our part of the world, they're used to the winter and surviving the winter much more, I think, readily than they are the hot, dry summers, especially when they're young.
Thank you all for your questions. And we do thank you all for joining us. We do hope you enjoyed today's class entitled Encouraging Biodiversity with Big Green. Our classes are recorded and can be found on our YouTube channel at bit.ly/faceyoutube. The link will be shared in the chat for you all at this time. And we ask that you please visit our website at cpsparentu.org for more information on our virtual programming. Follow us on all social media outlets at CPS Parent U. Whether you go to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, you can find us there. Also, sign up to receive more news of upcoming workshops that we have with Big Green. So we have a lot of their sessions coming up, and we want you to come back and join us. So thank you. And again, bit.ly/faceparent, that link will be dropped in the chat at this time. And we appreciate you all and have a wonderful evening. This was great.